Hi and welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Liz and this is A Catholic Mother's Journey. I'm really pleased you're joining me today. So today I felt like the Lord wanted me to speak on here about those situations where we can feel weary, discouraged, worried. You know, you might be trying to follow the Lord's will for your life. You may be trying to follow him and do what you think he wants you to do in life. But sometimes it just all feels like a struggle. And the chaos and hardships that we all face in life sometimes can just feel too much some days, can't they? But if we look to Jesus and surrender to him and we give it all to him, he will give us what we need to get through. And even if you're not feeling discouraged, weary, worried, he's calling us to a deeper surrender in him and to rest in him, whatever we're doing. It's a lifestyle of surrender to him. So I'm going to be looking at that too. So if any of that speaks to you, then please do watch this video. So I'm going to start by looking at Psalm 23. This is very well known. It's a very well known psalm. I'm just going to read it. The Lord's my shepherd. There is nothing I shall want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me to tranquil streams. He restores my soul, guiding me in paths of righteousness so that his name may be glorified. Even though I wander through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are at my side with your rod and your staff that comfort me. So in this, we are being called to be guided to places of rest, to be guided to places of peace, and for our souls to be restored. And it's an instruction. It's not just something nice to say to us that will perk us up for a minute and then we forget all about it again and then we go back to feeling discouraged and wearied and worried. No, it's an instruction to lean into the Lord, to be guided by him. It's a call to be guided by him, to rest in him. So what does this call to surrender really mean? Well, it's about a heart posture. Resting in the Lord doesn't necessarily mean not doing anything. Well, it doesn't mean not doing anything, but it means that we have peace in our hearts, whatever is going on the outside in our circumstances. We can have the Lord's serenity and peace no matter what's going on because we have surrendered that thing over to God. Maybe it's something we're worrying about. If we hand it over to him, we can stop worrying about it and have peace in our hearts instead. Because worrying is the opposite of surrender. We need to stop worrying about eventualities. We need to stop trying to make things happen by our own will and just give it to God instead. And when we do that, that's when he can work. We have free will as God created us. We just have to relinquish that and let him work when we give him that thing. You know, it's not even just for times when we're worried about something. It's a lifestyle, as I said before. It's giving every day to the Lord so that he can work in our lives, which is not easy to do. It doesn't come naturally to us. But when we do that, that's when we experience his peace, no matter what's going on. We do need to do what's practically necessary or possible in the circumstances. But when we've done what we can do, we just cast that care onto the Lord and he can deal with it. But we really do need to stop worrying about it when we hand it over. And then we can have peace and rest knowing that the Lord will deal with it. Now in the Bible, in Zechariah, this is Zechariah 4:6, this context is the rebuilding of the new temple in Jerusalem. And God speaks to Zerubbabel about this and tells him that the temple will be rebuilt and this will be accomplished through divine power, not by human strength. And he says, not by power, not by might, but by my spirit. So it's not going to be done by human might or power, but the Spirit of God. And so this applies to us too. You might be facing a situation where you're worried sick. You might be facing a situation where you're just really struggling. You're tired, you're weary, you're desperate. And you're like, how can I achieve this? How can I do it? It's just not humanly possible. I just feel desperate at the thought of it. Well, God can do it. We can't do it by our power or our might sometimes, or a lot of the time, but he can do it by his Spirit. But we must hand it over to him first so that he has free rein to then work on that thing for us. Now, it is easy to try and surrender it over to God. If you've got something going on that you're worried about, it's easy to try and surrender it to God, but you haven't actually given it to him, because you're still constantly worrying about it and thinking about it. We need to be at the point where we're not doing that anymore. So we need to pray. We need to pray for the grace to surrender that thing over to God. If it's something that's getting us worked up and emotional, we need to pray. We need to pray to have that peace, to be able to just give that over to the Lord. And it's almost like a supernatural thing. He gives you the grace, and that enables you to hand it over, and you're not worrying about it anymore. And it is also quite easy sometimes to hand something over, and then halfway through you try and take it back again, and you try and exert your own will, your control and your efforts over that thing again. I've been there myself. So we have to remember to keep it surrendered to God and not worry about it and not take it back again. I know, speaking of myself, I have to pray for the grace to surrender things over to God, and sometimes it's easy to forget to do it, and you find yourself wound up and worrying about something, and then you realise I need to hand it over. And it really helps to pray for the grace to surrender, as I say, and just to focus on God. If you spend time focusing on God in prayer, whatever that looks like to you, private prayer, receiving the sacraments. If you're Catholic, then, that enables you, by doing those things, God will give you the grace to hand that thing over, and you'll be in a position where you won't be worrying about it anymore. Now, just an example from my life. If you're not familiar with my channel, I have a 10-year-old son called George who's profoundly disabled. And recently we were given some medical equipment to help him with his breathing. He was having real trouble breathing at night time. And we were given this equipment, and I just knew it was something that we were supposed to have. I just knew that God was in it. I knew that God's will was for George to have this and for it to help him. But when we came home with it from hospital, we ran into all sorts of teething issues with it. It was difficult to get used to doing it. There were various things we had to get our heads around to be able to use it effectively. Things seemed to be going wrong. I reached the point where I was like, I don't think this is going to work. I just don't think it's working. We're not going to be able to use this. And I really felt like I was up against a brick wall. And it was strange, because I was like, I'm sure it was God's will for us to do this, but it doesn't seem to be working out. And then I realised, and this was via a friend who was encouraging me, that I needed to just hand it over to God. I hadn't surrendered it over to him. I was trying to make all these little decisions on my own in the middle of the night. They weren't working out. We weren't getting anywhere. All I was doing was making myself worked up and discouraged. And when I handed it over to God and prayed for the grace to surrender it to him, and just prayed, Lord, I surrender this to you. I surrender this to you. When I surrendered all those tricky little decisions over to him, things just changed. Things just changed. The situation was just transformed, because by submitting to him in that way, he was then able to work. And he worked those little miracles that happen where you take your hands off the thing and he can just do it for you. And you're just left thinking, why didn't I do that before? I know that's what I thought. But, sometimes we do forget to do it. If you can do it at the beginning of the thing, then so much the better. And obviously I hadn't done that. And even better, as I mentioned earlier, if you can have a lifestyle of surrender, that is the key, and that is the ideal thing that we should be doing. If we can just have that lifestyle of surrender, of our hearts being surrendered to God, and we live out that heart posture of resting in him as we go about our daily lives, then he will work in every aspect of our life. That might look like spending time with the Lord in prayer at the beginning of the day and handing over your day to him, just giving it to him. Lord, I give you this day. You're in control. You're in charge. I'm not in charge. And just see what he does. This way we can sort of preempt those things creeping in. And when I mean by those things creeping in, I don't mean that turbulence won't happen in your life. Turbulence happens in all of our lives at one point or another. But it's really about, as I say, heart posture, so that we can be in the Lord's rest when the turbulence comes our way, so that we feel the Lord's peace and we're in his rest even when it happens. So sometimes we have to just be surrendered before it even hits us, and that's the best position to be in. So if we can get in the habit of doing that, that's the ideal thing. But when you're hit by these sudden worries, these emergencies, these hardships, this chaos that just happens in life, you know, we just need to remember when these things happen to hand them straight over to the Lord, and He can work. And sometimes it doesn't feel instinctive to do so, but the more we get in the habit of doing so, the more effective we get at doing it. So I really hope that video has blessed and encouraged you. Please do take a moment to like the video and share it with anyone who comes to mind when you're watching it, who you think might like to see it. Thanks so much for watching today. I pray that you have a really blessed day, and I look forward to seeing you on the next one. So until then, God bless. Bye.